Welcome to our Good Friday service. This is an abbreviated service to allow the rest of our worship team to have some extra time to prepare for Easter Sunday coming up in a couple of days. So now let us prepare our hearts and let us listen for the Word of God. Reading from Mark's Gospel, chapter 15, verses 33 to 39. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he is calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's Son." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The virus could not have hit us at a more potent time of year. And I don't mean March break. I mean the season of Lent. Lent began back in mid-February, and at that point there was only a handful of coronavirus cases here in Canada. And now here we are at the end of the season of Lent with over 20,000 cases. Lent was originally a season of preparation for Easter, lasting 6 weeks, including 40 days of fasting during the week with 6 Sundays on the end of each weekend. And that pattern was inspired by the story of Jesus spending 40 days in the wilderness being tempted. And when Jesus was in the wilderness, he had nothing with him. He went completely without. He sacrificed. And of course, his ultimate sacrifice was on the cross. Now, traditionally, we give up something for Lent to symbolize Jesus going without in the wilderness and to recognize the sacrifice that was made by Jesus. Originally, what we gave up was food and eating. We would fast and give up luxuries. But these days, we give up silly stuff that doesn't matter, stuff like chocolate. Not a real sacrifice. Honestly, giving up chocolate for Lent makes a mockery of the sacrifice of Lent that is intended in the season. And the coronavirus has blown that silly tradition of giving up little things for Lent right out of the water. Because this year, now we are really giving up things that matter. We're giving up necessities. We're giving up jobs. We're giving up relationships. We're giving up income. We're giving up school. We're giving up luxuries, big ones like sporting events and concerts and theater going and other ones like clubs that we belong to or just basic shopping for non-necessities. We can still shop for groceries and necessities, but the fun shopping, gone. We're giving up sources of nurture like the church or recovery groups for people who need them. And those are all shifting online, losing their personal in-person touch. And there are some who are giving up contact with their children, not able to see their children, not able to see their spouses, not able to see their grandchildren, not able to see their boyfriends or their girlfriends, giving up the touch, the hug of a loved one. Or giving up having coffee or beer with a good friend, or in my case, a single malt scotch with a good friend. We're not giving up meaningless stuff like chocolate. This Lent, we're giving up a whole lot. This week I was dealing with a couple who've been married for decades and who split up this week during the virus, during the last week of Lent. But because of the virus, neither one of them has an alternative accommodation place that they can go to. So now they're trying to figure out how to be broken up while remaining forced to live under the same roof. Can you imagine how awkward that is? How uncomfortable that is? We've got families dealing with death, unable to say goodbye in the hospital, unable to have a proper funeral. We have families who had planned weddings up to a year or longer in advance that now have to be postponed. I have a friend who's a long-distance truck driver driving down into the States on a regular basis. He's a frontline worker now. Who ever thought of a truck driver as a frontline worker? He's high risk. So when he comes home, he sleeps in his truck down the street to minimize the risk to his family. He has not held his wife or his children in 3 weeks. Honestly, this is the first time for any of us in our lifetimes where we have actually felt the full weight of what Lent is really about. And Good Friday, today, is the climax of the Lenten journey, the day we remember when Jesus was executed. It's supposed to be a day of sorrow, and we are feeling the sorrow in spades. When things go tragically wrong in life, something in our brain demands an explanation. We need to find meaning in all of this. I know I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. And when we go looking for meaning, often the best place to go to find meaning is to turn to the theologians and the philosophers, the people whose job it is to provide meaning in life. And we turn to them and we start asking questions about why. Why is this happening? Why this? Why that? Why is it that we demand meaning for things like the virus and other tragedies? Well, it's because meaning allows us to try and make sense of that which does not make sense. And when we can try to make sense of it, then that makes us feel better. But what if there is no meaning? What if it just is? What if the virus is just a virus? A horrible, awful, deadly pandemic virus. When we look in the Bible at stories that happened during times of crisis, what we often find is something other than meaning attached to those stories. We find lament. What is lament? Lament is a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. Lament is the ultimate holding space for somebody. It's just being there in a poetic way. It's just God sitting with the person who is grieving and not trying to fix it, not trying to make it feel better, not trying to give it meaning. Because all of those well-intended actions actually end up invalidating the emotions of the moment. When a person has experienced deep loss in their lives, the last thing they want from you is for you to make it feel better. They need to feel the hurt and the loss in that moment. They don't need it removed. They need it honored. Trying to make it feel better violates their pain and their grief. So, in response to that, the authentic response to that pain and that grief is not trying to make it better, but to sit there with it in lament. We've lost the art of lament for the most part in North America these days. There are still other non-Western cultures that still know how to lament and mourn when death and tragedy happen. But in North America, our lamenting has often been reduced to the idea of a funeral visitation where people stand around, shake hands, hug, and talk with each other. But lament sits with grief. Lament gives voice to grief. Passionate, poetic voice. When you're experiencing loss, the last person you should turn to is a theologian or a philosopher, because that's not the time for wisdom. That is the time for poets and musicians. You don't need meaning. You need someone to sing the song of your heart. Why do so many people at a time of tragic death turn to a favorite song to listen to? Because that song is functioning like a lament for them. When we look to the Bible for examples of laments that we can find in the Bible, most of them are found in the Psalms. One of my old ministers, when I was younger, it told me that the Psalms function kind of like ancient psychotherapy for people of the Bible. But they're more than that. They're poetry. They're the biggest collection of poetry in the entire Bible. And I can give you some examples from the Psalms of some of the poetic laments that you can find there in the Psalms, like this one. Be gracious to me, Lord, for I am languishing. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are shaking with terror. That comes from Psalm 6. Or from Psalm 10. Why do you stand far off, O Lord? Why do you hide yourself in time of trouble? Or from Psalm 13. How long, O Lord? How long will you forget me? Forever? Or, of course, the most potent of all of the biblical psalm laments comes from Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? These are the words that Jesus uttered just before he died on the cross. He quoted Psalm 22. Now, why would the Son of God feel forsaken and abandoned by God when he was hanging on the cross? Why would the one whom we describe as being one with God feel abandoned by God? Well, in this moment, hanging on the cross, here we see the human side of Jesus at its fullest. This is where we, as reader, as listener, as follower, it's where we feel like we can really relate to Jesus and he can relate to us. Because we know what it's like to feel abandoned by God, even when God has not abandoned us. My God, why have you forsaken me? That is our cry in the time of the virus. That is our lament in the time of the virus. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. It sounds so much more powerful in the original Aramaic, doesn't it? Those original Aramaic words, the ones that Jesus would have actually uttered from the cross, have just so much more power to them. English as a language is so sanitized in its sounds, but ancient languages are so much grittier and more powerful. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? But poets and writers of good laments often don't just walk away and leave you sitting there in the grief and the sorrow. They leave you with a fresh sense of God's presence and hope, not to explain the trouble, but to provide reassurance within it. All the Psalms that I quoted for you earlier, if you read on further in most of them, you'll find they shift from sorrow to hope. They don't stay in the sorrow. So I'm going to leave you in a moment with a powerful song of lament leading to hope. Now, if the technology works right, it's going to play automatically as soon as this video is over. It should sync up automatically. It may pop up an advertisement for you. I'm sorry for that. I can't control that. Just click on the ad to get rid of it. When you're listening to that song, even though the songwriter says, "I will fix you," which is exactly what I said a lament is not supposed to do, the song doesn't actually fix you. It just gives you hope that one day you'll feel fixed. You'll feel whole. You'll feel healed. Today is a day of sorrow. But one day, this will all be over. And then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last.